What's going on, guys? Marco here with Front Yard Fantasy, and I am bringing you 3 early round busts. Now, I'll say busts in air quotes. Basically, I think that they are going to end up at least, 5 to 10, depending where they are, spots lower than where they're being drafted. And if you're in a redraft league, that means that 5 to 10 positional spots lower than where they are is maybe a round, maybe 2 rounds, maybe more than where they're going right now in your drafts. So that means that you are losing value. So basically, I'm talking about 3 guys who I think are probably going at their absolute ceilings in your redraft fantasy football leagues for 2022. I've got 3 guys I want to talk about. Before I do, I want to remind you to subscribe to the Front Yard Fantasy YouTube channel. We are marching towards 5,000 slowly but surely. We want to get there as soon as possible so we can bring as many people as we can game-winning, fantasy-winning advice, and of course, bring them the fantasy game show, which we've got going almost every day of the week, and it's a show that you do not want to miss. If you're not familiar, go ahead and check it out. The first one on the list is a guy who I've gotten a lot of flack for saying that he is an early round bust, an early round fade, and it's solely because of his ADP. I think that Deebo Samuel is a very good football player, as does basically everyone. He is currently going as the wide receiver 6 according to Fantasy Pros in redraft leagues, which means he is going as close to his ceiling as probably possible. Here's the reality. He was wide receiver 3 last year, which is great. You're saying maybe that's his ceiling. That's not his ceiling. He is going to be almost guaranteed to be worse than wide receiver 3 this year, unless something absolutely astronomical happens with the target competition on this team. Trey Lance is now leading this team, which means that Deebo Samuel is likely to see less volume as a passer or as a receiver, less volume as a runner. And I think Trey Lance's leading of this offense will still be efficient and good, and Deebo Samuel will be a very good player, but I would not be surprised, and I actually have Deebo Samuel currently outside of my top 12 wide receivers for 2022. I think he's going to be a high-end wide receiver too. Like I said, here's the reality. Deebo Samuel was hyper efficient. He saw around 120 targets last year and ended as the wide receiver 3, which in full PPR leagues, which is really just unlikely, unless you're dominating in touchdowns, which that's part of Deebo Samuel's deal here. You're really not likely to ever repeat something like that. When you look at what happened with Deebo Samuel as his usage, or as far as his usage goes, from weeks 1 through 9, he saw 10 targets per game. 10 targets per game. Now, if he saw that the whole season, I would say Deebo Samuel is a smash. Even with Trey Lance, he's probably still going to be, 7 to 8 targets a game, which if he's seeing 7 to 8 targets and doing the efficiency that he's seeing, that would be great. The other thing is he averaged 0.63 touchdowns per game in weeks 1 through 9. Also, not horrible. And if he was making all of his fantasy production off volume and still scoring that many touchdowns, I'd say great. The reality is that immediately changed when they wanted Deebo Samuel to get involved in the running game. From weeks 10 to 18, Deebo Samuel's targets per game went from 10 to 5 targets per game. His rushing opportunities went from around, roughly 2 rushing opportunities per game to like 6.25. So not a huge uptick, but enough that it drastically affected how he was used in the passing game. And his touchdown opportunity doubled. He averaged 1.2 touchdowns per game. And that is something that you really need to keep in mind with Deebo Samuel. He was hyper touchdown dependent at the end of the season. His volume plummeted in the passing or in the receiving game. And so there's something here with Deebo Samuel with all of his peripheral stats that just makes him an enormous red flag. Is he a good player? Yes. Is he a phenomenal NFL wide receiver? Yes. Is he a very, very good fantasy wide receiver? Yes. Is he the wide receiver 6? Maybe, but that's his absolute ceiling. And I am not in the habit of drafting players at their absolute ceiling in August. And that's where you're going to be drafting for your redraft league. So Deebo Samuel right now for me is basically a guy I am almost completely avoiding at cost. If he were to drop a full round in redraft leagues, then I'm interested. Like that still might be close to where he might max out at, but it's enough of a drop where I'm saying I'm fine. Wide receivers 9 to 15, that's really the range I'd be okay drafting him, even though I think that's probably his realistic ceiling for 2022. All right, so the next guy I'm going to talk about is another guy I've gotten a lot of flack for disliking in 2022, but there are just even more red flags, even more concerns than even with the Deebo Samuel that I talked about earlier. So it's a running back for the Los Angeles Rams. It's Cam Akers. Right now, according to Fantasy Pros, Cam Akers is going as the RB15. The RB15. I understand, yeah, he's the running back for the LA Rams. They're Super Bowl contenders. It's Sean McVay's offense. I get all of that. Darrell Henderson is going to be involved in this offense, whether you like it or not, whether fantasy managers like it or not. Darrell Henderson is going to be involved. And ultimately, this offense showed us that they don't really need a hyper-efficient running game to win football games. And I think it's going to be more of the same with that. They've added Allen Robinson. They're going to be able to pass the ball better because they're going to have a complement to Cooper Kupp. And, Matthew Stafford, his elbow is a little bit messed up right now. I'm not fully sure what to expect from that. It's likely he'll be okay, but something to keep an eye on. But ultimately, Cam Akers is going to be sharing time in this backfield on a team that doesn't really need to rely on the run in almost any capacity. And Cam Akers wasn't that great before his injury. And when he came back, granted, very early from his injury, he was really, really bad. The history of coming back from an Achilles tear as a running back specifically is either not really a ton of information, and the little bit of information that we do have says that it's almost impossible for them to come back at 100% of who they used to be. And I'll say it's very improbable. I won't say it's impossible, but it's very improbable. So Cam Akers is RB15. A fringe RB1 seems not even really within the real range of outcomes for Cam Akers in 2022. If he shows in 2022 that he is healthy, he is recovered, great. 2023 might be the time he can get to that RB15, RB1 conversation. But even so, even had that he came back in the playoffs a year after this injury, it's just way, way too soon to invest that highly in, especially a running back. And I don't really care about the offense that he's in, because when a player's best asset is the team and the offensive scheme and system he's in, odds are that player's not who you think he is. So Cam Akers at RB15 is not the price I want. Again, similar to Deebo, if he were to drop in value, if he would start to go, an RB20 to 26 range, that's a perfect range for me. I actually have him as my RB24 for the 2022 season. That's the range I'm okay buying. But if he's going as RB15, I have him as a bust or a fade for the season. All right, the last guy I want to talk about, and if you watch any of my other videos, you know that I've talked about the other guy on this team quite a bit, but it's Tyreek Hill, wide receiver for the now Miami Dolphins. He is no longer a Kansas City Chief. So here's the deal. He is a phenomenal player. He is much more than a just speedy wide receiver. He's a really good route runner. He's an aggressive wide receiver who has the strength and the speed combination that kills. And like I said, his route running added on top of that. He is just a special player in the NFL. There's only one other player, I think, in the NFL that plays his position that can do what he does, and it is his teammate, Jalen Waddle. And that's part of why I think his wide receiver 7 price tag is too high. I think Tua is going to find Tyreek Hill. I think this offense is going to be creatively using Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They're both going to be used in the passing game, obviously, but in the running game as well. I think they're going to be kind of like a Deebo light in these offense, or in this Miami Dolphins offense, both of them. But because of the fact that it's likely both of them, and they can truly be used interchangeably because of Jalen Waddle's skill set, I don't see any way that Tyreek Hill is the wide receiver 7 on the season. He likely is the 1A of these two wide receivers for the foreseeable future, maybe this entire season, maybe not the entire season. I believe Jalen Waddle might actually overtake Tyreek Hill at some point, because let's not forget Tyreek Hill is 28. He's going to be 29, near the end of the season, actually maybe early next season, but that being said, he's an older wide receiver who one of his best assets is his speed, and those are the things that you got to keep in mind. Obviously, his route running is going to keep him in the NFL for longer. He's not just a speed guy, but I think Jalen Waddle being such a comparable player to him, he might end up taking over that 1A role come late season for this Miami Dolphins team. And just because of those factors, Tyreek Hill to me is more of a wide receiver, 15 to 20. And I know that seems crazy, but I just don't think he's going to be able to separate enough and see the volume that he'll need to see to be a top 10 wide receiver, even the top 12 wide receiver that we are so accustomed to with Tyreek Hill. Remember, he's not with Patrick Mahomes, he's with Tua. And I am actually a believer of Tua, but Tua's a completely different player. He is super accurate. We know that of Tua's game, but he's dealt with injuries quite a bit. He's dealt with just consistency as an NFL quarterback. I do think Tua is going to take a step this year, but it's going to be something where we have some up weeks, we have some down weeks. These guys are going to have kind of like what we saw from Jamar Chase and T. Higgins last season, where one booms and one doesn't bust, but they're not phenomenal. And I think because these two are so interchangeable, it's going to be kind of a guessing game. I prefer Jalen Waddle for the longevity of the entire season and in dynasty leagues. I think Tyreek Hill is a good player who's going to win some people some leagues this year, but that can't happen if he's going as wide receiver 7. If he drops, a round and a half to 2 rounds, I'm much more interested in Tyreek Hill. All right, let me know your thoughts below. Hit me up on Twitter at Marco_14P and subscribe to the Front Yard Fantasy YouTube channel. Thank you for hanging out, and I will talk to you next time. Be kind, do good, peace.